The thunder of hooves rolled across the open plains just outside Central City. Two riders raced neck and neck, kicking up clouds of dust behind them as they pushed their horses hard toward the bustling city on the horizon. The wind whipped at their clothes, and the blue ribbons tied to their arms fluttered wildly. Rhett Colton was grinning like a madman, leaning low over his horse's neck, urging the stallion faster. To his left, Nira Windrider rode with graceful precision, her long, blonde braids streaming behind her like golden banners. Her pristine white duster and white cowboy hat stood out sharply against the golden grass. For someone who had only been riding professionally for a few months, Nira was shockingly good. What had started as a simple ride back from a delivery had turned into an unspoken race the moment Rhett gave her that challenging smirk. And to her own surprise, she had accepted. A bright, radiant smile had settled on her elegant features. The feeling of speed, the power of the horse beneath her, the wind rushing past her face, she hadn't expected to enjoy it this much. It felt freeing. Rhett glanced over at her, clearly surprised she was keeping up so well. "You're getting cocky, elf!" he shouted over the wind, laughing. Nira didn't reply with words. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, placing one gloved hand against her mare's neck. She reached out with her gift, gently brushing against the horse's mind. "One more push, my friend. Let's show him." The mare's ears flicked back, and suddenly the horse surged forward with renewed power. Nira pulled ahead in one smooth, graceful motion, leaving Rhett behind by 2 full lengths. Rhett's eyes widened in disbelief. "Hey, that's cheating!" he yelled, though the laughter in his voice betrayed him. Nira didn't turn around. The bright smile on her face only grew as she streaked toward the city gates, the white of her coat and hat cutting through the landscape like a shooting star. She crossed the invisible finish line first, slowing her mare to a proud canter as they entered the main street of Central City. Only then did she glance back over her shoulder at Rhett, who was still catching up. As they slowed to a trot down the busy street, Nira's smile softened, but the joy in her blue eyes remained. She had never imagined she would fall in love with this life so quickly. The new Frontier Line branch office stood proudly on one of Central City's main streets. A sturdy 2-story building freshly painted in clean white with blue trim. A large sign above the entrance proudly displayed the company's name, alongside the now familiar blue star and ribbon emblem. Rhett and Nira slowed their horses to a walk as they approached. Several workers were still putting the finishing touches on the building. One man was hammering the final boards onto the porch, while another was hanging a new lantern beside the door. Waiting out front were 3 familiar faces. Wyatt Colton stood with his arms crossed, watching their approach with a mix of amusement and mild disapproval. Beside him, Kane Remy was going over a stack of papers, his cat ears twitching at the sound of approaching hooves, and leaning against one of the support beams with his massive arms folded was Brock Tanner, his left shoulder still wrapped in bandages, but otherwise looking strong and healthy. Brock let out a loud laugh as they rode up. "Look at that! The elf's already beating you, Rhett. I knew it was only a matter of time." Rhett swung down from his saddle with a dramatic groan. "She cheated. I'm telling you, she used some elf magic on that horse." Nira dismounted gracefully, patting her mare's neck with genuine affection. The bright smile she wore during the race had softened into her usual calm, elegant expression, but the joy still lingered in her blue eyes. "I did no such thing," she said smoothly, though the slight curve at the corner of her mouth suggested otherwise. Wyatt shook his head, though there was clear fondness in his eyes as he looked at the 2 of them. "While you 2 were out playing, we actually got some work done," he said. "The office is officially finished. We just hung the sign this morning." Kane looked up from his papers, his tail flicking once. "We've already received our first 3 contracts from local merchants. Business is starting to come in." Brock pushed off the beam and walked over, clapping Rhett hard on the back. "Which means we're gonna need more guns," he said, his expression turning more serious, "especially after what happened to me last time." The mood shifted slightly at his words. Wyatt nodded slowly, his gaze moving between all of them: his son, Brock, Kane, and Nira. "Funny you should mention that," Wyatt said. "Rhett and I are heading into town to look at some revolvers. Those new six-shooters everyone's talking about." He paused, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And I've got a feeling we're about to find out just how expensive they really are in this city." Rhett and Nira tied their horses to the post outside the new office. The five of them stood together on the freshly built porch as the late morning sun warmed the street. Wyatt turned to his son and gave a small nod. "Walk with me. Let's go take a look at those revolvers." Rhett grinned. "Finally. I've been waiting to get my hands on one of those new six-shooters." The two of them made their way down the busy street toward one of Central City's better weapons shops. The sign above the door read "Blackthorn Arms" in bold lettering. The moment they stepped inside, the smell of oil, metal, and polished wood filled their noses. The shopkeeper, a stocky man with a thick mustache named Harlan, looked up from behind the counter. "Wyatt Colton," Harlan said with a respectful nod. "What brings you in today?" "We're looking at the new six-shooters," Wyatt said plainly. Harlan's face lit up. He reached under the counter and carefully laid out two revolvers on a velvet cloth. The guns gleamed under the light, sleek, well-balanced, with beautiful wooden grips. "Finest revolvers you'll find this side of the mountains," Harlan said proudly. "6 shots, fast reload, and reliable as sunrise. These are the real deal." Rhett picked one up, feeling the weight in his hand. His eyes were bright with excitement. "How much?" Wyatt asked, getting straight to business. Harlan leaned on the counter and gave them a knowing smile. 15 gold apiece. The words landed like a hammer. Rhett's eyebrows shot up. Even Wyatt, usually stone-faced, looked visibly surprised. 15 gold, Rhett repeated, stunned. "For one gun?" "That's robbery," Wyatt muttered under his breath. Harlan shrugged, clearly used to this reaction. "These aren't cheap to make, and demand is through the roof. Everyone wants one, but—" He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. "If you're willing to make the trip, I hear you can get the exact same guns in Michigan for only 2 gold apiece, maybe even less if you know where to look." Wyatt's eyes sharpened. "Michigan," he murmured, the name clearly turning over in his mind. Rhett looked at his father, already sensing where this was going. Wyatt stared at the revolver in his son's hand for a long moment, then slowly nodded to himself. He placed the gun back on the counter and looked at Harlan. "Thank you for your time." As they stepped back out onto the street, Wyatt was quiet. Rhett walked beside him, watching his father's face. "You're thinking about riding out there yourself, aren't you?" Rhett asked. Wyatt didn't answer right away. Then, in his deep, steady voice, he said, 15 gold for one gun here, 2 gold in Michigan. That's not just a good deal. That's enough to arm every rider we have." He looked at his son, his expression serious. "And while I'm out there, I can scout the entire western route." Rhett let out a low whistle. "You really are going to do it." Wyatt's gaze turned westward, as if he could already see the long road ahead. "I leave in 2 days." When Wyatt and Rhett returned to the new office, the others were waiting. Brock was sitting on the porch steps, sharpening his knife. Kane was organizing supply crates inside, and Nira stood gracefully by the doorway, her white hat casting a soft shadow over her face. They all looked up as the two men approached. Wyatt didn't waste any time. "I've made a decision," he said, his deep voice carrying easily. "I'm riding to Michigan." The announcement landed with weight. Brock stopped sharpening his knife mid-stroke. Kane stepped out of the office, ears perked. Even Nira's calm blue eyes narrowed slightly. Rhett crossed his arms, watching the reactions. "Those new six-shooters everyone's carrying," Wyatt continued. "They're charging 15 gold apiece here in Central City. In Michigan, the same guns go for 2 gold coins, maybe less." He let that sink in for a moment. "That's enough to properly arm every rider we've got, and still have coin left over. While I'm out there, I'll also map the western route, see what we're dealing with before we push the line further." Brock frowned, his big hand instinctively moving to his still bandaged shoulder. "You're going alone?" "I am," Wyatt said firmly. "You're still healing. Rhett's needed here. Kane's managing logistics. And Nira—" He glanced at the high elf. "You've only been riding a short while. This route is dangerous. I won't risk any of you." Kane's tail flicked once, clearly unhappy. "With all due respect, sir, after what happened to Brock, sending our leader out alone feels like a bad idea." Wyatt gave them all a steady look, the same look that had kept men in line for years. "I've been riding longer than any of you have been alive. I'll wear the blue ribbon just like the rest of you. This is my call." The group fell into an uneasy silence. Rhett finally spoke up, though his voice lacked its usual cockiness. "You sure about this, Pa?" Wyatt placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm sure." He looked at each of them, his son, his strongest rider, his most reliable lieutenant, and the elegant high elf who had recently joined their ranks. "While I'm gone, you 4 keep this office running. Take the local contracts. Stay sharp." Wyatt turned and began walking toward the stable behind the office, his decision clearly final. As he walked away, Nira watched him go, her expression unreadable. Brock muttered under his breath, "Stubborn old bastard." Rhett let out a long sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "Well, looks like the old man's going on his own adventure." The morning after his announcement, Wyatt Colton rode out of Central City alone. He sat tall in the saddle, his chestnut stallion Valor moving with steady purpose. A clean blue ribbon was tied firmly around his right arm, fluttering occasionally in the wind. Behind him, the new Frontier Line office grew smaller until it disappeared from view. The first few days took him through the fertile Central Valley, where golden fields stretched in every direction. Then the landscape began to change. On the 5th day, Wyatt reached the first of the old imperial structures, an old dilapidated wooden fort in the Badlands. The fortress was weathered but still imposing. Its thick wood walls stood strong, though parts had crumbled from decades of neglect. The stables were in poor condition, and the main gate hung crookedly on its hinges. Wyatt dismounted and walked the perimeter, carefully inspecting every building. "Not bad," he muttered, running a hand along the stone. "The walls are solid. Just needs new timber for the stables and some repairs to the roofs. Could be operational within a month." He made detailed notes in his journal, marking the fort's condition and what materials would be needed. 2 days later, he found Shadowgate Fort nestled on a hill in the Blackthorn Wilds. This one was in worse shape. Part of the western wall had collapsed, and the main barracks showed significant water damage. Still, Wyatt could see the potential. "Defensible position," he noted. "Good sight lines. Just needs a lot of work." The further west he rode, the more he understood the true scale of the challenge. This route was nearly twice as long as the eastern one. It would require more stations, more horses, and significantly more coin. On his 12th night, Wyatt made camp in the grasslands just beyond Tenshu Fort. He sat by a modest fire, slowly eating from his rations as the stars appeared overhead. He pulled the blue ribbon from his arm and held it in his calloused hands, staring into the flames. "Rhett, Brock, Kane, Nira," he said quietly, naming each of them. A faint smile touched his lips. "You kids have no idea what you've started." He looked toward the west, where Nishigane waited. "This isn't just about delivering mail anymore." 13 days after leaving Central City, Wyatt finally reached his destination. The city of Michigan rose before him, a striking fusion of elegant pagoda rooftops and industrial smokestacks. The constant sound of metal being hammered filled the air like a heartbeat. Catfolk, humans, and other races moved through the wide streets in a constant flow of commerce and craftsmanship. As Wyatt rode through the main gates, many eyes turned toward the lone rider with the blue ribbon on his arm. Some looked curious, others looked wary. Wyatt scanned the bustling city around him, taking in the unfamiliar architecture and vibrant energy. He was tired, dusty, and sore from the long ride. But as he looked at the city that produced the guns his company desperately needed. "All right then," he said under his breath. "Time to find a bed for the night." Wyatt had been wandering the narrow streets of Michigan for nearly an hour, completely lost. The city was a maze of tightly packed wooden buildings, paper lanterns, and winding alleys that all looked the same in the dark. His horse, Valor, plodded along behind him, clearly as tired of this as he was. He was just about to admit defeat and sleep in a stable when he turned a corner too sharply and nearly collided with someone. "Easy there, cowboy." Wyatt looked down and found himself face to face with a young woman. She had sharp dark brown eyes, long black hair tied back in a ponytail, and a pair of triangular cat ears that twitched with amusement. A long, fluffy black tail swayed lazily behind her. She wore dark clothing with red accents and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged here. She glanced at the blue ribbon tied around his arm and raised an eyebrow. "You're a long way from home, aren't you? Eastmere cowboys don't show up in Michigan very often, especially not ones wearing whatever that is." Wyatt blinked, then looked down at the blue ribbon on his sleeve. "This? It's called a Frontier Line ribbon. We're building a mail and courier service across the continent. Fast routes, reliable delivery, trying to connect the East and West properly." The girl tilted her head, clearly intrigued. "Interesting. Most outsiders who come here are merchants or troublemakers. You don't look like either." Wyatt chuckled. "I'm just trying to find a place to stable my horse and get a room for the night. Name's Wyatt Colton." "Miko," she replied. She studied him for another second, then nodded toward the street behind her. "The Golden Reed isn't far. It's the safest place for outsiders at night. They've got their own stable, too. Come on, I'll take you there." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "You always help lost cowboys, or am I just lucky tonight?" Miko smirked. "Let's just say I'm curious about that blue ribbon of yours, and I don't like seeing people get robbed on their first night in the city." She turned and started walking. Wyatt hesitated for only a moment before following, leading Valor behind him. Miko led Wyatt through the streets of Nishigani. As they walked, she glanced at him. "I'll come pick you up in the morning," she said casually. "Take you to the best gun shop in the city. You'll get a much better deal than here in the East." Wyatt looked at her, slightly surprised. "You don't have to do that." Miko shrugged, a playful smirk on her face. "I'm curious about your little blue ribbon company. Besides, I like watching outsiders try to haggle with Nishigani merchants. It's entertaining." The next morning, Miko led Wyatt through a maze of narrow side streets, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew the city like the back of her hand. Her tail swayed lazily as she walked, occasionally flicking with amusement whenever she glanced back at the tall cowboy trailing behind her. "You really came all the way from Central City just to buy guns?" she asked, her tone light and curious. "Needed to see the route anyway," Wyatt replied gruffly. "Two birds, one stone." Miko let out a small giggle. "You frontier types are so serious. It's cute." Miko led Wyatt into Sato's Fine Firearms, a deceptively modest shop tucked away from the main streets. The moment they stepped inside, the sharp scent of gun oil, charcoal, and polished steel hit them. Behind the counter stood an older catfolk man with steel-gray hair and sharp, calculating eyes. The moment his gaze landed on the blue ribbon tied around Wyatt's arm, his ears twitched with clear interest. "Well now, Sato murmured, setting down the rifle he was working on. "That's a color I haven't seen in Nishigani before." Miko hopped up to sit on the edge of the counter, swinging her legs playfully. "Old man, this is Wyatt. He came all the way from Central City. He's interested in your six-shooters." Wyatt got straight to business. "How much for your best revolvers?" Sato studied him for a moment before answering. "2 gold each, 1 gold and AE silver if you buy more than 10. Wyatt didn't blink. "I'll take 10. Miko's ears perked up in surprise. 10? That's... But before she could finish, Sato raised a paw, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Hold on now. That blue ribbon... I've been hearing rumors. Some new courier company running between Eastmere and Central City, making fast times, causing quite a stir in the east." He leaned forward. "That you?" Wyatt gave a single nod. "Frontier Line." Sato's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine interest. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "If you're building something real out there, and you're already turning a profit on that first route..." He paused, then gave Wyatt a shrewd look. "Then I might be willing to do business on more than just revolvers." Miko's tail flicked with excitement as she looked between the two men. Wyatt met Sato's gaze evenly. "I'm listening." Sato smiled, showing a hint of fang. 24 revolvers. Top quality. 1 gold and 60 silver each. That's my best offer. And I don't give that price to just anyone." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, calculating. Then he gave a firm nod. 24 it is." Miko let out a low whistle, clearly impressed. As Sato went to the back to gather the weapons, Miko turned to Wyatt with a playful but genuinely curious look. "You're really going all in, huh?" She tilted her head, ears twitching. "Most people who come here buy 2 or 3 guns. You just dropped coin for 2 dozen without even blinking." She hopped off the counter and walked over to a nearby rack, picking up a finely crafted rifle with reverence. She ran her fingers along the barrel with clear affection. "Though if I had the coin," she said softly, almost to herself, "I'd be buying one of these instead. These Nishigani rifles are something else, lighter than they look, accurate up to 400 yards in the right hands." She glanced back at Wyatt with a mischievous little smile. "Revolvers are fine for close work, but a good rifle? That's real power." Wyatt watched her quietly, saying nothing, but the corner of his mouth twitched slightly in what might have been the beginning of a smile. When Sato returned, he was carrying 2 wooden crates. He set them down on the counter with a heavy thud and looked at Wyatt with renewed interest. 24 revolvers, Sato said slowly. "That's not a purchase. That's an investment." Wyatt gave a single nod. "We're preparing to open the second route. From Central City all the way to Nishigane, that means more riders, more stations, more guns." The old gunsmith's eyes gleamed with clear commercial interest. Rumors of the Frontier Line's success on the eastern route had already reached Nishigani. Fast delivery times, reliable service, growing reputation. Sato stroked his whiskers, clearly doing the math in his head. "Then let me sweeten the deal," he said. 24 revolvers at 1 gold and 60 silver each, and I'll throw in 2,000 rounds of ammunition free of charge." Miko's jaw actually dropped. 2,000, she exclaimed, her golden eyes wide. "Grandpa Sato, you've never given anyone that kind of deal." The old catfolk ignored Miko's outburst and kept his sharp gaze locked on Wyatt. "I'm betting on you, Blue Ribbon. If your company succeeds in opening this western route, there will be a lot of guns needed in the years to come. I want to be the one supplying them." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, then extended his hand across the counter. "You've got yourself a deal." Sato shook it firmly, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. While Sato and his apprentices began preparing the crates, Miko leaned against the counter beside Wyatt, arms crossed, studying him with open curiosity. "You're not just buying guns," she said, her usual playful tone mixed with something more serious. You're building something big, aren't you?" She glanced at the blue ribbon on his arm, then back up at his face. "I've seen a lot of people come through this city, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone quite like you." Sato stroked his beard, clearly impressed by the scale of Wyatt's ambition. 24 revolvers plus 2,000 rounds is a heavy order, the old gunsmith said. Too heavy for one man and one horse to carry back safely on a long ride. Wyatt nodded, recognizing the truth in that. "I'll take 10 revolvers with me now," he said. "Enough to arm my core team. You ship the remaining 14 revolvers and the 2,000 rounds with a trade caravan headed east in the next few weeks. I'll pay half up front, half on delivery." Sato smiled, clearly pleased with the arrangement. "You've got a good head for business, Blue Ribbon. 10 revolvers, 200 rounds of ammunition for the road, and the rest shipped. I'll even give you my best caravan contacts." Miko, who had been quietly listening, let out a low whistle. 10 revolvers is still a lot to carry," she said, eyeing Wyatt. "Your poor horse is going to hate you." Wyatt simply shrugged. "He's carried worse." After the deal was finalized and the coins changed hands, Wyatt stepped back outside with 2 heavy saddlebags filled with carefully wrapped revolvers and ammunition. Miko and Sato followed him out. The old gunsmith gave Wyatt a respectful nod. "Safe travels back. I look forward to a long and profitable relationship with the Frontier Line." Miko leaned against the doorframe, her tail swaying lazily as she gave Wyatt a bright, playful grin. "Try not to get lost on the way back, tall and stoic," she teased. "And maybe next time you're in Nishigani, I'll show you some of the real toys this city makes." Wyatt mounted Valor, the horse visibly heavier now with the added weight. He looked down at both of them and gave a single, respectful nod. "Appreciate the help." With that, he turned Valor westward, then immediately corrected himself and turned east, heading back toward Central City. Miko and Sato stood outside the shop, watching the lone rider with the blue ribbon disappear into the bustling streets of Nishigani. Miko tilted her head, still smiling faintly. Interesting guy. The journey back from Nishigani was slower, harder, and far more dangerous than the ride out. Valor was weighed down by 10 heavy revolvers and nearly 200 rounds of ammunition packed carefully into the saddlebags. The horse still moved well, but Wyatt could feel the difference in every stride. He kept the pace steady rather than pushing hard. On the 5th day of his return journey, Wyatt entered the Red Rock Badlands once again. The towering red canyons rose around him like the ribs of some ancient beast. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the rocks into a furnace. Wyatt rode through a particularly narrow canyon, his eyes constantly scanning the high ridges above him. That was when the first boulder fell. It smashed into the ground just 10 feet behind Valor, sending shards of rock flying in every direction. Valor reared in panic, but Wyatt kept perfect control, urging the horse forward into a full gallop. High above on the canyon rim stood a massive figure, easily 15 feet tall, gray, leathery skin. A single enormous eye burned with rage, a cyclops. Another boulder, the size of a wagon wheel, came hurtling down. Wyatt leaned hard to the left, and the boulder exploded against the canyon wall where he had been a split second earlier. The chase was on. Wyatt rode like a man possessed, guiding Valor through the twisting canyon with masterful precision. Every time the Cyclops hurled another massive rock, Wyatt would swerve, duck, or accelerate at just the right moment. The blue ribbon on his arm whipped violently in the wind as he rode. From a shadowed ledge halfway up the canyon wall, a pair of sharp green eyes watched the entire spectacle. Raven crouched motionless, her dark leather armor blending perfectly into the rocks. Her silver-white hair moved slightly in the hot wind as she observed the lone rider below. She had heard of the blue ribbon before from her clan, but this was the first time she had seen one of its wearers in action. The way the man rode, calm, precise, almost fearless, while boulders the size of boulders rained down around him. It was incredible. Most men would have panicked. Most horses would have thrown their rider and bolted. But this rider and his horse moved like they were one being. Raven's green eyes narrowed, fixed on the bright blue ribbon flapping wildly on the man's arm. A strange feeling stirred in her chest. Not fear, not anger. It was something much more dangerous. Fascination. As Wyatt disappeared around a bend in the canyon, still miraculously unharmed, Raven slowly rose to her feet. For the first time in her life, the savage, dark elf raider whispered a single word under her breath. Impressive. Wyatt returned to Central City 11 days after his journey to Nichigain. The team gathered around as he unloaded the heavy saddlebags. 10 gleaming revolvers were handed out. Brock took his with a wide grin, Kane accepted his with quiet gratitude, and Rhett immediately began spinning his like a performer. When Wyatt offered one to Nira, the High Elf surprised everyone by taking 2, smoothly holstering one on each hip with elegant precision. That night, they gathered around a large map. Wyatt shared everything he had learned, the condition of what he dubbed Wyatt's Fort, Shadowgate Fort, and Tenshu Fort. Plans were made. The expansion of the western route had officially begun. 1 month later, Wyatt's Fort. The sound of hammers and saws echoed through the red rock badlands. Wyatt's Fort was slowly coming back to life. New timber framed the stables, fresh stonework reinforced the damaged walls, and riders were already using it as a rest stop. From a high ridge overlooking the fort, Raven crouched in silence. She watched the blue ribbon riders moving with purpose. They laughed while they worked. They rode in and out of the fort at dangerous speeds, the blue fabric on their arms fluttering like banners of defiance against the harsh land. Her green eyes followed one rider in particular as he galloped away from the fort, leaning low over his horse, moving with pure joy. Raven's fingers tightened around the branch she was holding. Why do they smile like that, she thought. This land has taken so many lives, yet they ride through it as if it belongs to them. For the first time, the word slipped into her mind. Fascination. 3 months later, new relay station. Further west, in a stretch of rocky terrain between Wyatt's Fort and Shadowgate Fort, a new relay station was being constructed. Raven was much closer this time. She lay hidden among the boulders, close enough to hear their voices. A group of workers and riders were putting up the final walls of the station. Rhett was among them, shirtless and covered in sweat, hammering nails with a manic grin on his face while shouting jokes. Nira rode up on her white mare, dismounted gracefully, and joined the conversation. Even Brock was there, lifting massive beams like they weighed nothing. Raven watched how they moved together, like a pack, how they teased each other, how they seemed genuinely happy despite the brutal work and dangerous lands. Her ears twitched. The fascination was slowly evolving into something sharper, curiosity. She wanted to know what made them like this. 6 months later, Shadowgate Fort Deep, in the Blackthorn Wilds, Shadowgate Fort was undergoing major restoration. This fort was far more ambitious, a hybrid of Western military design and elegant Nichigain keep aesthetics. Workers were reinforcing the stone base, while carpenters built the graceful wooden upper levels with curved, tiled roofs. Raven had grown bold. She no longer watched from a distance. That night, she crept dangerously close to the fort. From the tree line, she could see a campfire burning in the courtyard. 4 figures sat around it: Rhett, Brock, Kane, and Nira. She could hear their laughter, their stories, the way they spoke about the future of the frontier line with such passion and confidence. Raven's green eyes gleamed in the darkness as she listened to every word. The envy was now undeniable. She wanted what they had. She wanted that freedom. She wanted to ride like them. Without fear, without chains, with pure joy. Raven slowly clenched her fists. She had made her decision. The next time one of them rode through her territory alone, she would stop him. 2 days later, a lone rider galloped along the narrow road between Shadowgate Fort and Tenshu Fort, his blue ribbons streaming behind him. Rhett Colton rode with his usual wild energy, that signature manic grin plastered across his face. Without warning, a figure dropped silently from the trees, landing gracefully in the middle of the road. Rhett yanked hard on the reins, his horse skidding to a stop just yards away from her. Raven stood tall, bow drawn, an arrow aimed directly at his chest. Her green eyes burned with intensity as she stared up at him. The manic rider looked down at her, his wild grin slowly spreading across his face. "Well now," Rhett said, tilting his head. "Finally decided to say hello, huh?" "You talk pretty words," she said, her voice cold. Raven didn't lower her bow. The arrow remained pointed straight at his chest, her green eyes cold and calculating. "Get off the horse," she ordered, her voice low and sharp. "Slowly." Rhett raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He swung his leg over and slid down from the saddle with casual ease, landing lightly on the forest floor. His horse shifted nervously, sensing the tension. "Hands where I can see them," Raven said. Rhett slowly raised his hands, palms open. "You know," he said conversationally, "most people say hello before they point arrows at you, but I guess we're skipping the pleasantries." Raven ignored him. She stepped closer, keeping the bow trained on him with one hand while reaching behind her back with the other. She pulled a length of thin, strong rope from her belt, the same kind she used for traps. "Wrists together," she commanded. Rhett glanced at the rope, then back at her face. His grin never faded. "You're really doing this, huh? Tying up the friendly mailman?" "Wrists. Now." He sighed dramatically but complied, holding his wrists out in front of him. Raven moved with practiced efficiency. In seconds, she had his wrists bound tightly together with a series of quick, secure knots. She gave the rope a hard tug to test it, then nodded to herself. "On your knees," she said. Rhett raised an eyebrow again. "You know, if you wanted me on my knees, all you had to do was ask nicely." "Shut up and kneel." Still grinning, Rhett slowly dropped to one knee, then the other. Raven stepped behind him, grabbed the collar of his duster, and pulled him toward a thick tree a few feet away. She looped the rope around the trunk and tied it off with another series of tight, professional knots, securing him firmly in place. When she was finished, she stepped back and lowered her bow slightly, though she kept an arrow nocked. Rhett tested the ropes, twisting his wrists. They didn't budge. "Damn," he said, sounding genuinely impressed. "You're good at this. Do this often?" Raven stared down at him, her expression unreadable. The blue ribbon on his arm fluttered slightly in the breeze. She had been watching these riders for months, watching how they moved, how they laughed, how they seemed to treat the dangerous land like it was nothing more than a playground. And now, here was one of them, tied to a tree, completely at her mercy. And he was still smiling like he'd won something. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She tightened her grip on the bow. "Afraid I will escape, wild one?" "You're tied to a tree. I could kill you right now and no one would ever know." Rhett let out a low chuckle, completely unbothered. "Yeah, you could, but then you'd never get the answer you actually want." He tilted his head, that wild grin never fading. "Look at you. You didn't just stop me to kill me. You've been watching us for months. You're curious. You're hungry to understand. So here's the deal." Rhett leaned forward as much as the ropes allowed, his voice dropping into something smoother, more persuasive. "Untie me. Let me sit like a normal person instead of some prisoner. Then I'll tell you everything you want to know. How we started, why we ride the way we do, what the blue ribbon really means." Raven's eyes narrowed dangerously. "And why should I trust you?" Because if I wanted to run, I would have tried already, Rhett said with a shrug. And because deep down, you know I'm not your enemy. He flashed her that signature manic grin again. Besides, don't you want to talk to me as an equal instead of some animal you tied to a tree? Raven was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Her fingers twitched at her side. Finally, with a frustrated growl, she stepped forward and roughly cut the rope binding him to the tree with a sharp knife. "Try anything stupid," she warned, pressing the blade against his throat for a moment, "and I'll put an arrow through your eye before you can blink." Rhett was still smiling like this was all part of some grand game. Fair enough. He slid down the tree until he was sitting comfortably on the ground, then patted the spot across from him. "Well then, wild one," he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement, "ask me anything." Raven slowly lowered herself to the ground, sitting cross-legged a few feet away from him. Her bow was still within easy reach, but for the first time, she wasn't pointing it at him. She stared at him intensely, her voice low and serious. "Tell me the truth. Why do you ride like the world is trying to kill you, and you're enjoying it?" Rhett looked at her for a long moment, his usual manic energy settling into something more focused. He could see it in her eyes, the hunger, the frustration, the deep, unspoken longing. "You're from a clan, right?" he asked. Raven gave a single sharp nod. "Then you already know what it's like," Rhett continued, his voice calm but intense. "You're born into a hierarchy. You follow the chief. You follow the elders. You follow the traditions. You hunt when they say hunt. You fight when they say fight. You live and die by rules someone else made for you long before you were born." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "Now, imagine the opposite." Rhett's voice grew more passionate, that signature wild spark returning to his eyes. "Imagine waking up every morning tying a blue ribbon to your arm, getting on your horse and just riding. No one tells you where to go. No one tells you how fast. No one tells you when to stop. The only thing that matters is you, your horse, and the road ahead." He gestured toward the horizon with a nod. "Out there, on the open road, speed becomes freedom. When you're galloping so fast the wind screams in your ears and the ground is nothing but a blur beneath you. That's when you feel truly alive. There's no clan, no chief, no orders. Just you and the horse, flying through the world like you own it." Rhett's voice dropped lower, almost reverent. "That's what the blue ribbon means. It's not about delivering messages. It's not even really about the company. It's about choosing your own life. Every single day we choose to be free." He let those words hang in the air. Raven sat completely still. Her green eyes had grown wider and wider as he spoke. Her lips were slightly parted, her breathing shallow. Every word he said seemed to strike something deep inside her. Something she had buried for years under duty, survival, and tribal law. The wild, dark elf, who had always lived by the rules of her clan, was visibly shaken. For a long moment there was only silence between them. Then, without saying another word, Rhett slowly raised his still-tied hands. He worked one of the spare blue ribbons free from his belt and held it out toward her. The bright blue strip of cloth dangled between them. Rhett didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply looked her in the eyes and offered her the ribbon. A silent invitation. Raven stared at the fluttering piece of blue fabric like it was the most dangerous and beautiful thing she had ever seen. Her hand trembled slightly as she slowly reached out toward it. Raven's fingers hovered just inches away from the blue ribbon. For several long seconds, she didn't move. Her green eyes were fixed on that simple strip of cloth, like it held some kind of forbidden power. Rhett remained perfectly still, holding the ribbon out to her with steady hands. His usual manic grin had softened into something quieter, patient, almost understanding. The wind gently moved through the trees around them. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. Then, with a movement so slow it almost didn't seem real, Raven's fingers closed around the ribbon. The moment she touched it, something shifted in her expression. Her brows furrowed, as if she was angry at herself for even considering it. But she didn't let go. She pulled the ribbon toward herself, holding it in both hands, staring down at it. "This is stupid," she muttered almost to herself. "It's just a piece of cloth." Rhett gave her a small, knowing smile. "It's not the cloth," he said softly. "It's what it represents." Raven's grip tightened on the ribbon. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw clenched. She looked like she was fighting a war inside her own mind. Finally, she looked back up at him. Her green eyes were no longer cold and hostile. They were conflicted, vulnerable, hungry. "If I take this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what happens then?" Rhett leaned back against the tree, his expression surprisingly gentle for someone so chaotic. "Then you ride with us." He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Not as a raider, not as a prisoner, as one of us. You get your own horse, your own blue ribbon, and every morning you get to choose, are you going to live by someone else's rules, or are you going to ride?" Raven looked down at the ribbon in her hands again. Her thumbs slowly ran over the fabric. The silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice so quiet Rhett almost missed it, she spoke. "I want to ride." She looked up at him, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "I want to feel what you feel." Rhett's manic grin slowly returned, but this time it was warmer. He nodded toward the ribbon in her hands. "Then tie it on." Raven stared at the bright blue ribbon in her hands for a long, silent moment. Then, with slightly trembling fingers, she slowly wrapped it around her left bicep and tied it off. The vivid blue stood out boldly against her dark leather armor and deep tan skin. She looked down at it, almost like she couldn't believe what she had just done. Rhett watched her with a soft, knowing smile. "Looks good on you," he said quietly. Raven shot him a glare, but there was no venom in it this time. Rhett stood up and brushed himself off. "Only got one horse, so you're riding behind me." "Wait, how did you untie yourself?" Rhett gave her a manic grin again. "Trade secret." Raven hesitated for just a second before climbing up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, though she made sure to keep some distance between their bodies. "If you try anything funny," she muttered near his ear, "I will throw you off this horse." Rhett let out a loud, wild laugh. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." He clicked his tongue and urged the horse forward. They began riding east together. 2 riders, 1 horse, and now 2 blue ribbons fluttering in the wind. The sun was beginning to set when they rode into Wyatt's Fort in the Badlands. The moment the group saw Rhett riding in with a wild-looking dark elf woman sitting behind him, both wearing blue ribbons, all conversation died instantly. Brock's jaw dropped, Kane's ears shot straight up. Neera's blue eyes widened. Even Wyatt looked visibly surprised. Rhett wore his usual manic grin as he helped Raven down from the horse. "Everyone," he announced dramatically, "meet Raven. She's been stalking us for months. Turns out she really liked what she saw." Raven stood stiffly beside him, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Her hand kept drifting to the blue ribbon on her arm, as if reassuring herself it was really there. Brock was the first to speak. "You brought home a raider." "She's not a raider anymore," Rhett said, throwing an arm around Raven's shoulders. She immediately shrugged it off. "She's one of us now." An awkward silence fell over the group. Wyatt studied Raven carefully for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "If she wears the ribbon, she's one of us." He turned to the group. "It's been a long few months. We just opened the western route. We have a new rider. Tonight, we celebrate." Rhett's eyes lit up. "Booze?" Wyatt allowed himself a rare smile. Booze. Later that night at the saloon in Red Rock Settlement. The saloon in the small settlement near Wyatt's fort was loud, warm, and packed. Their table was covered in empty glasses and large bottles of nightshade, the infamous golden spirit brewed by dark elf clans in the wilds. Rhett took a sip, and his eyes went wide. "Wait a damn minute," he muttered, staring at his glass in disbelief. "This is tequila." The rest of the group looked at him like he was crazy. Raven, who was already on her third glass, raised an eyebrow. "It's nightshade," she corrected. "No, no, no," Rhett said, suddenly very excited. "This is tequila, and you people have no idea how to drink it properly." He grabbed the salt shaker from the table and a slice of lime. "Watch this." He licked the side of his hand, sprinkled salt on it, licked the salt off, threw back the shot of nightshade, and bit into the lime. The entire table stared at him. Rhett slammed the glass down with a massive grin. "Your turn, wild one," he said, sliding a glass toward Raven. Raven looked at the salt and lime like they were foreign objects, then looked back at Rhett with a challenging smirk. She copied his actions exactly, licking the salt, throwing back the shot, and biting the lime. Her eyes widened. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face as the alcohol hit her system. "I like this," she said, her voice already getting looser. Brock roared with laughter. Kane looked mildly concerned. Nira was elegantly sipping her drink with an amused smile. Even Wyatt had a faint smirk on his face. As the night went on and the bottle of nightshade got lower, Raven slowly began to relax. The walls she had built over years started to crumble under the influence of tequila and the chaotic energy of her new companions. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was laughing. After a few more rounds at the table, the group migrated to the long wooden bar, claiming it as their own. Wyatt had already excused himself earlier with a quiet, "Don't burn the place down," knowing full well what was coming. The old man had seen enough wild nights to know when to bow out gracefully. Rhett, however, was just getting started. He slammed a bottle of nightshade onto the bar and grinned like a madman. "All right, you savages, listen up. You've been drinking this stuff wrong your entire lives." He licked the side of his hand, sprinkled salt on it, licked it off, threw back a shot, and bit into a slice of lime with dramatic flair. Raven's eyes lit up with recognition. "That's what he made me do earlier," she said, already reaching for the salt. One by one, they all tried it. Brock roared with laughter after his first proper shot. Nira's cheeks turned bright red as she delicately licked the salt off her wrist. Kane's eyes went wide, his tail puffing up. Rhett kept pouring. The energy in the saloon skyrocketed. Soon the entire bar was chaos. Brock had his massive arms slung around Kane's shoulders, both of them laughing hysterically. Nira, usually so graceful, was red-faced and giggling, her white cowboy hat slightly crooked. Raven was leaning heavily against the bar, silver-white hair wild, laughing loudly at something Rhett said. Rhett stood on top of a bar stool like a king, bottle in hand, pouring shots for everyone while shouting, "This is how we do it back home!" The laughter grew louder. The shots kept coming. Salt and lime rinds littered the bar. Hours blurred together. Eventually, the night claimed its victims. Kane was the first to fall. Face down on the bar, his fluffy tail limp, completely passed out. Brock laughed so hard at the sight that he nearly fell off his stool, still holding onto Kane's shoulder. Nira had slumped forward in her chair, cheek resting on her folded arms, a peaceful smile on her flushed face. Raven was leaning heavily against Rhett, her head on his shoulder, mumbling something about finally feeling free. And Rhett? Rhett was the last one standing. He stood in the middle of the destroyed bar, eyes bloodshot, swaying slightly, holding one final shot of nightshade. The saloon was filled with the sound of his friends' drunken breathing and the faint smell of spilled liquor and lime. He looked at the chaos around him. His passed-out friends, the empty bottles, the salt and lime rinds everywhere, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. With slightly trembling hands, he raised the final glass. "Tequila Sunrise Warriors," he muttered with a tired, drunken smile. Then he threw back the last shot.
Blue and Gavin!